Hello, so today on Explore Africa series, we're going to be looking at African folk tales and myths, okay? So this is going to be something different than, typically what we've been doing, because in the past we've been looking at like kingdoms and trade routes and that sort of thing, but now we're just going to look at something that has to do with storytelling and, let's see how people of African descent and African origin, how they kept myths alive and how they told folk tales.
I've already done it.
So as we usually do, there'll be like a brief introduction, we'll look at objectives, then general history, timeline quiz, and we will conclude. So for the introduction, we see that African folk tales and myths are woven into the rich tapestry of the continent's diverse cultures. These stories have been passed down through generations, and it has wisdom, values, and beliefs of Africa's people, really. So for the objectives are going to cover diversity, storytelling, and culture. So we're going to learn why African folk tales and myths are important and diverse in cultures. We're going to learn about the common ideas and parts in African story. And we're going to understand why these stories are still important and how they affect art, books, and culture. So, oral tradition. African folklore has primarily been an oral tradition with stories handed down from one generation to the next through spoken word. So typically you would have an elder or adults or grandparents with the children, just teaching them through storytelling about values that are very important, how to behave in society, or just general traditions that they won't pass down. And also it's a time of like bonding, and it's just a time where younger people can learn wisdom from the older generation. So elders passing down the ancestral story to younger generations through spoken word. Traditional African storytellers would also share historical narratives and cultural lessons, and then folk songs are used to convey moral lessons and preserve cultural identity. And sometimes reciting these myths and legends during communal gatherings is also a form of entertainment as well as education. Now, because Africa is so diverse, and as you can see, it's been split into blocks. So you've got North Africa, you've got West Africa, you've got Central Africa, you've got East Africa, you've got Southern Africa. Because it's split into these kind of blocks, each area has its own specific traditions that are reflective of its location. So Africa's vast and diverse landscape is reflected in its folklore. Each region and community has its own unique stories, often influenced by local geography, wildlife, and history. So for West Africa is typically known for tales that feature like Anansi the spider and other vibrant characters. East Africa, for example, stories often reflect the region's diverse landscapes, including savannas and coastal areas. Southern Africa is rich in folklore, portraying the interactions between humans and animals. Central Africa, the regions near the Great Lakes may have folk tales influenced by the landscape of vast lakes and highlands, incorporating elements of nature into their narratives. And then North Africa, stories influenced by the Sahara Desert and historical events, blending Arab and indigenous African elements. So now also we look at the common themes. So despite their diversity, African folktales often share common themes such as the importance of community, the consequences of greed, and the power of storytelling. So community importance, this is quite important because many stories emphasize the value of community cooperation and unity. And there's that really popular saying that it takes a village to raise a child. So Africans generally are very, communal people. They just love being in communities. They thrive in communities. They also teach on the consequences of greed. So it often highlights the negative outcomes of selfishness as greed. So in storytelling about, the dangers and the consequences when someone was greedy or when someone was selfish, it's to reinforce the fact that we're a community and we need to help each other. The power of storytelling. Stories frequently underscore the significance of oral tradition and storytelling. Animism in nature, for example. Folktales often feature animals, spirits, and natural elements, reflecting animistic beliefs and the interconnections of humans and nature. So trickster characters. Trickster figures like Anansi the spider, hare, and the tortoise are recurring characters in African folklore. They are known for their clever and mischievous antics. Okay, so for example, Anansi the spider is a mischievous and clever spider known for tricking others in West African folklore. There's also a cunning rabbit featured in African American folktales, using wit to outsmart adversaries. And then the tortoise you find in a lot of African cultures, and the tortoise is known as a trickster and uses cunning strategies to try and achieve his goal. And the hare is a common trickster, again featured in a lot of African stories, and he uses cleverness and mischief to navigate challenges. So Aesop's fables parallels. Some African folktales bear similarities to Aesop's fables, with animals imparting moral lessons. Now, this is my opinion. I wouldn't really say that Africans were inspired by Aesop, because at the end of the day, because these are oral tradition, so we're not even sure whether or not Aesop even got these stories from Africans, right? We don't know who the originators of these stories are, whether it be Aesop or whether it be the ancient Africans, we just don't know. But there are a lot of similarities between Aesop's fables and African folklore. So for example, the tortoise and the hare, there's similar versions that exist in African folklore, often with the tortoise and the hare's characters teaching lessons about perseverance, right? The lion's share, for example. Aesop's fable about sharing the spoils finds parallels in African tales, emphasizing fair distribution within a community. The boy who cried wolf. Comparable stories in African folklore caution against dishonesty and the consequences of false alarm. And then the fox and the crow. Variants of the fable appear in African traditions, featuring animals and conveying moral lessons about flattery and deception. So we see that there are a lot of similarities. So written record. Some African folktales have been transcribed and collected in written form in recent years. So we see that scholars and authors have compiled written collections of African folktales, preserving them for future generations, which is really good that there's that now. And we see that there are books by African authors. Writers such as Chinua Achebe and Ngugiwa Thiong'o have written novels and stories inspired by traditional folklore, contributing to a written record. Then, in terms of academic research, for example, researchers and anthropologists have documented and analysed African folklore in written form, contributing to academic understanding. And in terms of its use in educational materials, we see that written versions of African folklores are often used in educational materials, introducing students to the rich cultural heritage of the continent. So it's about how the tortoise got its cracked, its rough back. Do you want to hear the story of how it got its rough back? The tortoise, how it got its rough back. This is how folk tales work. This is how it got its rough back. This is how folk tales work. So basically, this is what happened. So in the animal kingdom, there was famine in the land. There was hunger. So all the animals came to this meeting and all said, you know what? We're all going to sacrifice our mothers. We're all going to kill our mothers and eat our mothers. So they all agreed that they were going to do this. But the dog loved his mother so much, he refused. He and his mother had a plan. The mother was going to hide somewhere. So where the mother hid was in a space in the sky. What would happen is the dog would go and meet his mother, and the little food that the mother would find, the dog and the mother would eat. So whilst all the other animals in the kingdom were growing thin, the dog was looking okay. And the tortoise was actually the dog's best friend. So tortoise approached the dog and said, look, you're looking really well, what's going on? And dog's like, yeah, we're just managing, as we do. And tortoise kept pressing, like, what's going on? What's going on? I'm your closest friend. Surely you can share with me. Look, we're all skinny. We're hungry. You're looking fresh. And then the dog said, well, to be honest, I didn't really kill my mother. I hid my mother somewhere and she feeds me. And that's how I look so well. So she's like, oh, wow, really? Where is her hiding place then? And the dog didn't want to reveal. And tortoise pressed again. Come on, I'm your best friend. I'm not going to tell anyone. This is me. You know me. I can keep secrets. I can keep your secrets. Anyway, tortoise pressed and pressed and pressed. And dog said, well, mother's hiding in the sky. But it's only when I sing a song that she's then able to get me to join her. And then, we get to eat. So tortoise was like, what song is that? Dog didn't want to say. Tortoise pressed and pressed and pressed and pressed and pressed, and eventually the dog told the tortoise the kind of song. So dog went off on his way, on his merry way, and then tortoise goes and gathers all the animals and then says, guess what, guys? Whilst we all sacrificed our mothers, because we were hungry, dog didn't. And dog's mother keeps feeding him, right? But guess what? He's told me the code, he's told me the song. Let's go. Get the mother to come down and we will be able to eat dog's mother. So all the animals agreed. So anyway, tortoise goes to the place where the dog sings the song to the mother. And he starts to sing the song. And the dog's mother hears and is like, I don't recognize that. That's not my son. However, she releases the rope. Because whenever the dog would sing that song, she would release a rope from the sky. And that's what the dog will use to climb up to meet her. So she releases the rope. So at this point, tortoise holds onto the rope and she's pulling the rope. And as she pulls the rope, dog sees that it's not her son and cuts the rope. And guess what? Tortoise falls, lands on the earth, and his back is all mangled, right? His back then becomes not the perfect pattern that it should be, not the perfect smooth surface that it should be. It's all got,
the shells.
Yeah, the shell. It's not as beautiful as it should be. It's all broken, cracked. The rest of the animals all ran away and left tortoise on his own. So there's so many morals. So this is how folk tales are told in African culture. So from those stories, you would then draw wisdom nuggets. So for example, give me 2 wisdom nuggets in that story that I've just shared. What wisdom principles can you learn from that story?
Don't tell people everything.
Fantastic. Don't reveal all your secrets. Keep your deep secrets to yourself, right? Don't just share your secrets. That's 1. Number 2, what other principles can you learn?
And don't kill other people's mums or stuff. Or
Yeah, that's a good point. That's how, in African folk tales, they will teach you some morals in those stories. Morals and principles to guide you. So animism and ancestral spirits. So many African folk tales and myths are deeply rooted in animism and the belief in ancestral spirits. They often feature animals, spirits, and natural elements as central characters. Now, this is something that we don't do. And who can tell me why we don't practice this?
It's not what we believe in.
And what did we read in the 10 Commandments? What was the commandment number 2?
Don't create false gods.
Don't make fake gods. So a lot of these things would involve creating fake gods. And because we believe in Jesus Christ, we believe in God, that's not something that we're going to, embrace at all. So influence on literature. So African folk tales and myths have had significant influence on African literature and storytelling, with authors like Chinua Achebe and Ngugi wa Thiong'o drawing inspiration from these narratives. Okay, so for example, Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. He draws inspiration from Igbo folklore, weaving traditional stories and proverbs in his acclaimed novel, providing cultural depth. Ngugi wa Thiong'o's work incorporates elements of Gikuyu folklore into his writing, connecting his narratives to the rich oral traditions of his community. Amos Tutuola's The Palm Wine Drinkard is influenced by Yoruba folklore featuring mythical creatures and fantastical elements from traditional stories. And then contemporary African authors continue to integrate folklore themes and characters in their works, creating a literary dialogue between the old and the new. So cultural preservation. Folktales and myths serve as a means of preserving cultural identity and heritage in a rapidly changing world. So, for example, oral tradition. This continued practice of passing down folktales through oral tradition helps preserve cultural values, language, and heritage. Then traditional performances as well. Cultural events and performances such as storytelling sessions and theatrical presentations contribute to the preservation of African folklore. The folklore is often celebrated during community festivals and ceremonies, reinforcing cultural identity and maintaining a connection to ancestral practices. And efforts to incorporate African folklore into educational curricula contribute to cultural preservation by ensuring younger generations learn and appreciate these traditions. Contemporary relevance. These stories continue to be relevant in modern African society, serving as a source of inspiration, moral guidance, and entertainment. So African folklores continue to offer moral lessons relevant to contemporary societal issues, providing guidance on ethics, behaviour, and community values. Elements of African folklore, characters and themes are frequently incorporated into modern literature, film, television, contributing to popular culture. It also plays a crucial role in fostering a sense of cultural identity, helping communities to maintain a connection to their heritage in the face of globalization. African folklore, with their universal themes, resonate with audiences worldwide, promoting cross-cultural understanding. So we can see that there's just so much that African folklore offers the world. So timeline, ancient times. African folklore dates back thousands of years and has been passed down through oral tradition. Colonial era. European colonialism had an impact on the transmission of African folklore, as colonial powers often imposed their own narratives and suppressed local stories. In the 20th century, African authors and scholars began collecting and recording traditional folktales for preservation and study. And in the contemporary era, African folktales and myths continue to be told and celebrated both within Africa and globally. Quiz. What is the common way of sharing African folktales and myths? A, is it written text? B, is it through television? Or C, is it through oral tradition? Question 2. Which character is a common trickster figure in African folklore? A, a lion. B, tortoise. C, eagle. Question 3. What do many African folktales teach? A, community, greed and storytelling. B, romantic love stories. C, stories of war and conquest. Question 4. Name some authors that use African folklore. A, William Shakespeare and Jane Austen. B, Charles Dickens and Leo Tolstoy. C, Chinua Achebe and Ngugi Thiong'o. Question 5. How does African folktales help today? A, not useful. B, moral guidance, entertainment and culture. C, political propaganda. Answers. So conclusion. African folktales and myths are treasures of cultural diversity, wisdom and storytelling. They continue to play a vital role in preserving African heritage and shaping contemporary literature and art. And finally, these narratives captivate and educate, emphasizing universal themes that resonate with audiences around the world. Thank you very much for listening.